churches are filling up, Bibles are selling like crazy, youth groups are filling up, and everywhere I go, people see it. Something is going on. And I think, in principle, people are realizing how empty the worldly way is. It doesn't satisfy that deep hunger of their heart being made in the image of God. Faithfulness is not theologically complicated. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So you have a king who creates a domain, his domain. So you have a king and a dom. You have a kingdom right there in the first line. The appeal of the kingdom is to draw rebels to the king, back in under the appropriate authority of the sovereign. And if somebody is saying, oh, you're not extending the kingdom, I'd say, of course I am. Watch. Now, I'm not doing it on my strength, but I'm a player here. I'm not just an empty vessel.
Yeah, or as our friend Vishal von Mangalwadi would say, you're not a zero. He always says that, you're not a zero.
Postmodern people, we don't believe in reason. I certainly don't believe in Christianity. Why not? Here's the reasons.
Right.
A, B, C, D, E,
right,
you know. Huh? Well, on the one hand, they're talking like postmodernists. On the other hand, they're talking like human beings made in the image of God. I know that I can speak to these individuals or these audiences, and I can speak actual truth to them, and they will understand that I'm speaking truth because they operate in terms of truth.
Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences. This is the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. As Christians, we all know that our mission is to spread the gospel around the world to all the nations. However, our mission, the Great Commission, also involves working to transform our cultures so that they increasingly reflect the truth, goodness, and the beauty of God's kingdom. Tragically, the church has largely neglected this second part of her mission, and today most Christians are having little influence on their surrounding cultures. Join us on this podcast as we rediscover what it means for each of us to disciple the nations and to create Christ-honoring cultures that reflect the character of the living God. Hey guys, my name is Luke Allen. I'm one of the co-hosts here on the show, and I'm here today with my dad and our host, Scott Allen. Howdy, Dad.
Hey, Luke.
Hey.
It's good to be back.
Yep. We just hopped off a great episode with Greg Koukl, who I've been wanting to have on the podcast for a long time, so it was just so much fun to actually sit down with him and have a conversation. It was really fun, actually, just chatting with him because we have a ton in common, we realize. He has a background in Food for the Hungry, as do you, Dad, and Dwight, who was also on today. And he was sent out into missions by Darrow Miller, same as you, Dad, and Dwight as well, and my mom, and just have a lot in common there. And so we have a similar origin story, which is fun to chat about. But as far as what we talked about today, Dad, and then also just introducing him to our audience, for anyone who's not aware of Greg Koukl and what he does, would you mind kind of setting us up here?
Yeah, absolutely. What an honor to have Greg on. And like you said, Luke, it was really interesting to hear how many things we shared in common, you know, both the background with Food for the Hungry, working overseas with Food for the Hungry, our interactions and relationships with Darrow Miller. So yeah, a lot that I wasn't even aware of. And, you know, I count that such an honor because for those of you who know Greg Koukl, he's really one of the leading thinkers, teachers, especially around the area of Christian apologetics. Brilliant guy, very humble. Greg founded Stand to Reason in 1993. He currently serves as president of that organization. He has spoken on more than 90 university campuses in the United States and abroad. He hosts a regular call-in radio show, and he's done that for more than 30 years, advocating what he calls Christianity worth thinking about. Greg has written many books, 7 books, including Street Smarts, Using Questions to Answer Christianity's Toughest Challenges, and we talk about that a bit today. Here's a book that he wrote that I loved, really great book. It's called The Story of Reality, How the World Began, How It Ends, and Everything Important That Happens in Between. That's such a great title. And it fits really well with what we teach at the DNA. We have a session that we teach regularly called The Transforming Story, which is the story of reality. And so this is a really great book, and it came out that Greg, of all of the books that he wrote, this is the one that's closest to his heart. I thought that was interesting. And then probably the one that's the most famous in terms of Christians knowing about and using is a book called Tactics, a Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions. It's a really outstanding book. Greg has a master's in philosophy of religion and ethics from the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. He also has his master's in Christian apologetics from Simon Greenleaf University. And in addition to his work with Stand to Reason, he serves as an adjunct professor of Christian apologetics at Biola University. And then, Luke, we focused around, there was so much we wanted to talk about, but we focused it around what does it mean to be an ambassador? Mm-hmm. Paul makes it explicit in 1 Corinthians that we are called to be ambassadors of the King and his kingdom. So we talk about what does that really mean for us to be representatives or ambassadors of this realm, this domain called God's kingdom, and the king that rules over that kingdom. And it was really rich, really great, I think great insights on very practically what does that mean? How do we do that? And how do we think about kingdom and our role in it versus the king and whatnot? So a lot of good questions and answers around that. Luke, what stood out to you today?
Yeah, I mean, I've always just loved that analogy of being an ambassador. Growing up, I played a lot of basketball. My mom always told me, go and be an ambassador for Christ on the court. And even at a young age, like 10 years old, that made sense to me. Like, okay, I'm representing someone here. I'm representing a way of life. I'm representing a way to live in this world. And I can do that on the basketball court. It's that simple. This is the assignment we've been given as Christians after we became Christians, is to go and be ambassadors, to represent something, a way of life. And I just love that analogy, and I really appreciated the way he unpacked it today. I learned a bunch, so I hope everyone listening to this learns as much as I did. This one's a great one to take notes along with if you guys aren't driving or doing the dishes, so encourage you to do that. But yeah, again, all the resources we mentioned in the show, as always, will be linked down in the show notes, as well as anything else that we discussed during the episode. So yeah, without further ado, let's hop into this discussion with Greg Koukl.
Greg, thank you so much for taking your precious time and being with us today. What an honor.
Well, this is what makes it precious, actually, to be with guys like you and Dwight especially. I mean, Dwight and I have a history. In 1982, I was 32 years old. He was my boss at 25, running the whole Food for the Hungry operation there in Thailand. What an impressive guy and impressive team. So it is really a treat for me to be back with Dwight and with both of you as well.
Thank you so much, Greg. And Dwight, it's great to have you on as well. So I wonder, before we jump in, Greg, we wanted to talk with you. I mean, obviously we'd go down so many different roads, but we thought we'd kind of focus in on what does it mean for Christians today in the times that we live in to be ambassadors for Christ, and just kind of focus our conversation around that. But I thought, before we did that, just to go back to the time that you and Dwight shared together working with Food for the Hungry in Thailand. You guys both were, I think, it was at a time when you were both at Biola and agreed to go and serve in a time where there was a refugee crisis in Cambodia and in Thailand. Any memories, Greg, from that time for you, or even you, Dwight? Like, how did God really work in your life in that kind of pivotal time? That was quite different than what you're doing now, Greg. And so, I'd love to hear any thoughts you have about the impact that had on you.
Well, I wasn't at Biola then. I didn't come to Biola for another 10 years or so to work on my MA Phil under J.P. Moreland. But no, I was kind of 82. I became a Christian in 73, so I was 9 years in Christ. So it's kind of wet behind the ears still. And it was, taking as a whole, it was probably the most significant macro experience of my life. Being immersed in a culture, able to learn the language a bit, and Thai is actually a fairly easy language to learn if you have an ear for it. And the people are wonderful, and the team I worked with there, Scott, Dwight leading that team, was magnificent. I was so impressed with everybody, and it was very adventuresome for me. And I think that there were a lot of VOLAGs, voluntary agencies, that were working with Cambodian refugees following the Holocaust of 75 to 79 and the exodus from Cambodia to Thailand to escape the Khmer Rouge and the threat of that. I don't know that, and I ran a feeding program for 250 people there, the whole camp. But it was a turnkey operation. FHI and the precursors to me had already put together a great thing. I just stepped into the role. But to be in that environment, I think the bigger impact wasn't the impact I had on other people. It was the impact, pardon me, that others had on me. The broad experience and also the team there, and working together with these wonderful people in a capacity of meeting really deep and profound human need. And so I would say, and I tell this to people, look, I wasn't married at that time. I didn't get married for a while after that. But I was, when you're young and you don't have a lot of obligations, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have family, you don't have kids, get out and do something absolutely crazy for God in another country for a long period of time. It will change you like nothing has ever changed you, and I know Dwight can attest to this, and that would be my recommendation from that experience, because that's what happened to me. It was such a profound experience, because life in that circumstance for us was whittled down to the absolute necessities. You weren't concerned about like TV shows and, who's playing in the Super Bowl or whatever, I don't remember what was really popular. Dallas was a TV show that was a big deal.
You were missing your Dallas
then.
episodes.
Yes, it didn't matter. None of that mattered. What mattered was the things that matter. And so your life was focused intensely on the things that really matter, and that has a way of transforming one's perspective, and that's what I took away from that experience.
Thanks, Greg. How about you, Dwight? When you look back, were there a couple of things that really stand out from you? And that was, a time when you and Greg were working together.
Well, I do have a very vivid memory of Greg Koukl working with us in the refugee camps, and that was fun. He was the handsome, smart dude that was older than all of us, and doing a great job. But I think I was there 3.5 years, so I think what I took away from all of that was it was an adventure for sure. I wasn't married either at the time, but I think what I took away from it was an insight into the fact that other people are different culturally, think differently, and yet they're not different. And so we worked with Hmong and Lao and Vietnamese and, of course, the Khmer Rouge, and all of the suffering that those people had gone through under the different regimes that forced them to leave. And it was just insightful to see these are my, other human beings that have different experiences, different cultures, but we see the world the same, and it helped me understand life better.
Now, Dwight, I thought you were going to mention that at one time at a staff dinner in Bangkok, as I talked a lot, and I was talking so much I bit my tongue, and everybody thought that was really funny. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't remember that. I'm sorry. You're a good talker. I know that. I was impressed, so there you go. Good talker.
Well, both of you guys, thank you for your faithfulness to Christ over many years now, from that beginning and even before that, all the way through to the ministry and the way that God has used you both. So thank you for that. Greg, I wanted to get into, this topic of being an ambassador for Christ and for his kingdom in a fallen world. I know that's something that you enjoy talking about, I would just like to kind of delve into that. I've always been struck by the analogy that Christ, or that Paul uses, that we are ambassadors for Christ. Just what does that mean? How does that shape the way we think about the way we interact with this world? What are we being ambassadors for? And maybe we could even start there. We're ambassadors for Christ, for his realm, his kingdom. When you think about it that way, Greg, what do you think of what are the defining hallmarks of God's kingdom that we as his ambassadors need to faithfully represent?
Yeah, Scott, there's a lot there, and you're touching, a happy nerve for me, because Stand to Reason is built on this concept. It's incarnational. We're not just trying to convey information, which we do, and other organizations do, and I'm glad they do that. but we are incarnational. We're trying to build a certain type of person. We call him an ambassador. That is our role in the culture. A lot of people think in terms of evangelism, and of course that's entailed, but evangelism has kind of got a negative connotation with a lot of people, even with Christians, because it seems confrontational. And I like the ambassadors for Christ, 2 Corinthians 5:20, where Paul is talking, actually in that paragraph, there's 5 different references to reconciliation in some form. And he says we are in that process where we're agents of reconciliation between Christ and the rest of the world. We are, I should say, between God and the rest of the world. That's the way Paul puts it. We beg of you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. I like the idea of more of a genial diplomacy that you kind of take away from the concept of being an ambassador. So when I think of myself as an ambassador, part of what I'm thinking about is a much different motif or posture than as an evangelist. It just feels different to me, and I like that better. And there's a softer element to it, even though it's purposeful. And at Stand to Reason, we kind of look at 3 different areas of a good ambassador. This applies to any ambassador representing any sovereign. There's a knowledge component. You have to know the message that is meant to be communicated by the sovereign to whoever he has sent the ambassador to reach. There is a wisdom component that is a maneuvering kind of element, and that's the tactical element, and I've written a book about that. And then there's often overlooked the character component. Because if you've got all the knowledge and you're clever in conversations, you can maneuver really well. But you're a womanizer, or a drunk, or just plain rude, then you can see how the character is going to undermine the entire element. So those are the 3 areas I think any good ambassador needs to be developing. Ambassador for Christ needs to be developing in order to be more effective as an ambassador. Knowledge, wisdom, and character. And we have a very particular way of characterizing it at Stand to Reason. This might be helpful to some of your listeners. Knowledge is an accurately informed mind. In other words, you don't have to be like a perfect in all areas of theology, or if you're talking about a political ambassador of all of those elements, but you got to know the message that is meant to be communicated in the context of the culture you're reaching. So when Dwight and I were in Thailand, I mean, there were certain cultural sensibilities you always had to be sensitive to. You didn't put your feet up, for example. You didn't tower over people. You kind of crouched down, because these were all culturally offensive to people. And so there's a knowledge component, an accurately informed mind. There is also the wisdom component, which we call an artful method. An artful method. And this is where, I've always emphasized, since I kind of work these ideas out, using questions to navigate. And this is the secret of low stress but highly effective interactions in which the Christian ambassador can maintain a tremendous amount of safety in the conversation, because questions keep you safe. You're asking other questions. You're not making statements that you have to then defend. But questions are very flexible, and you can make lots of headway, even making your own point by asking questions. Okay, I wrote another book called Street Smarts, and the subtitle is using questions to answer Christianity's toughest challenges. So it can be used in different ways. Character is an attractive manner. It's an attractive manner. I mean, I love that. An accurately informed mind, an artful method, and attractive manner. There's a nice euphony there in English, and it's memorable. But those are the things that we encourage people to keep in mind in all their engagements. And after a conversation, to go back and reflect. Did I need to bone up in my knowledge? Was my maneuvering, could I have improved there? What about my character? Was I nice? Be nice. That's like, duh. That's a pretty straightforward. Okay. And then one thing I'll say about the kingdom thing is, and I developed this in the Story of Reality. One thing I noticed about the opening line of the story, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So you have a king who creates a domain. his domain. So you have a king and a dom. You have a kingdom right there in the first line. And it's interesting, later on in the story when John the Baptist shows up, he's preaching the kingdom of God, and he indicates Jesus over there, Lamb of God. He preaches the kingdom. He trains a bunch of guys to preach the kingdom. And here's the way I understand that in the broadest sense. And obviously it's a rich notion that can be developed a lot. But the appeal of the kingdom is to draw rebels to the king, back in under the appropriate authority of the sovereign. It's a call back to be under the proper sovereign of the universe. And in other words, God's in charge. And I actually think that message sometimes gets lost in a certain way that we share the gospel and evangelize. And I think to our discredit, we've lost some of the emphasis on, look at, we're kind of in trouble here, people. It's not just like join up and be part of the happy family because God loves everybody and everything's wonderful. No, God's a little bit ticked off. And you can see that in the messages of the book of Acts, in fact, because they don't even talk about the love of God at all. So I think this broader, and these are the people Jesus changed to follow after him. Now, obviously, the love of God is manifest in the message, and I'm not taking exception with that. But the idea, to me, the operative idea of kingdom is God's in charge. It's his program, and we're not with it. And there's a call back. Now there's an entry point. That's the grace and mercy of God that makes it possible to be able to return. And that's the door by which we come in. But we're coming in underneath now the authority of the King of the universe. And I think that for me, that's the best way to understand the broadest kind of theme of the Bible, kingdom, and how it manifests in our own behavior and in our appeal to other people. We're not just giving fire insurance. We want you to come back to the Father who made you for friendship with him.
Hi, friends. Thanks again for joining us today. If you've listened to this show for any length of time, you'll know that Ideas Have Consequences is the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. And as a nonprofit ministry, we are grateful and thankful to offer all of our podcasts and our biblical worldview courses completely for free, thanks to our generous supporters. If this podcast has been a blessing to you, we would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening today. Or you can also help by simply sharing your favorite episode with a friend. And if you're able, we hope that you'll consider supporting this podcast with a donation to the Disciple Nations Alliance. To give, visit disciplenations.org and click on the blue donate button right there on the homepage. And we also have our website linked down in the show notes below. And now for a word from our friends over at the Center for Biblical Unity about their new Ambassadors program. Guys, this program is a great opportunity to deepen your understanding of a biblical worldview through trusted teachings and practical trainings. You might even recognize some of our books from the Disciple Nations Alliance in the syllabus. And one of the instructors is some guy named Scott Allen, who you might recognize. If you're ready to take your understanding of a biblical worldview to the next level, then we encourage you to check this program out.
Injustice is all around us. It can leave us feeling helpless and in despair. Can one person really make a difference and push back against the darkness? At the Center for Biblical Unity, we're passionate about equipping Christians to tackle today's cultural challenges through a distinctly biblical worldview. That is why we are launching the Ambassadors for Biblical Justice cohort. This 9-month mentoring program will walk you through the vital and practical tools you need to make a real difference in your community. Maybe you're a mother of a special needs child who has a heart to reach out to other special needs children in your local church. Or maybe you're a pastor who wants to more effectively address poverty in your community. Or maybe you're a businessman who wants to connect the dots between your vocation and your worldview. Whoever you are, if you have a heart for justice and want to explore how it aligns with the historic Christian faith, this program is for you. We are now accepting applications for our inaugural 2026 cohort. You will be mentored by seasoned Christian leaders who will help you apply biblical principles to real-world issues of justice, poverty, and cultural renewal. For more information, please visit centerforbiblicalunity.com/ambassador. Come be a part of our effort to change the world one life at a time.
Greg, if I could pick up on that, I read the book, The Story of Reality. I loved it, and that was one of the things that stood out to me was the way that you began that book by talking about a king, and he was a king, God the Creator, by virtue of the fact that everything that he created, he was sovereign over, and
Right.
so the kingdom idea comes from the very beginning, and then, as you said, it becomes a theme that runs through the entire Bible. And in fact, the story of reality is the story of a king and a kingdom. And I like what you said. A call back to the king, to his his sovereign rule. I think that's so good. At the same time, Greg, there's so much confusion. I see it all the time in the church on this subject, and especially right now, it seems to be very heated. There's a lot of debates about the kingdom. One of the verses that I hear quoted a lot, of course, is Jesus, as he was standing before Pilate, that he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And people kind of love to quote that and say, in a way that says the kingdom, God's kingdom, it's not of this world, it's of heaven, and it's not kind of almost I guess the implication is it's not really relevant for this world. It will be when he comes back with his kingdom, when he returns, then we can start talking about the subject of the kingdom, but not really before. It's not really before that it's relevant. And my concern with that, honestly, is that I think it leads to practically is a kind of a disengagement in the brokenness of this world, and it's almost like God doesn't care about the world. He will when he comes back, but until then, he's just kind of rescuing people out of the world into heaven, and the world can kind of go to hell, or something like that, and that's okay, What are your thoughts about all this, Greg? I've really been anxious to hear kind of what you think about all this in the context of what we're talking about as ambassadors for the kingdom here.
Of course, and I do see this problem, and I do think it's a problem. It's kind of a myopic oversimplification. It's like they're not really seeing through. Beyond that statement that Jesus makes. Okay, and if you think of the context there, Jesus is on trial. He's innocent, and Pilate knows it, and so he's giving an opportunity. Well, aren't you going to speak? Whatever. Are you the king or not? He said, well, not of this world. I'm not in your system. That's all he's saying. I'm not going to rescue myself the way you will rescue yourself. I'm not going to do what you want me to do here and get I'm not just going to cooperate with that. All right? And that's all he's saying. He's not saying that disciples should just disengage from the world and only preach the sweet by and by, And here's the most cogent defense of that notion. What did Jesus do for 3.5 years? Think of John the Baptist. Are you the one? John's in jail. He's discouraged. Jesus said, you tell him this. The blind see, the lame walk, the dead rise, the poor, and here it's so obvious to me that he means the spiritually poor, because he makes this reference in the Sermon on the Mount, spiritual poverty. He's not talking about people who are financially poor. He never addressed financially poor people ever, not a single word. All 4 Gospels, I read every single line of every Gospel to look at that. The poor, the spiritually poor, have the gospel preached to them, all right? But notice that it's not just the poor have the spiritually poor have the gospel. He did all these other things. He met the needs that were there in front of him because he had compassion for the people. And so, that to me is, when you look at the fullness. No, Jesus wasn't telling people to go to the polls. They didn't have suffrage then. Nobody voted. So it was not appropriate. You're not going to campaign against slavery. That was not even possible in that set of circumstances. But in the sense of addressing the needs of people, that the needs which were not in themselves directly related to their spiritual condition. Jesus did that. Now, of course, it had consequence. The deeds that he did, the attesting miracles, bore test in order that you may know that the Son of Man has the power to forgive sins. I say to you, arise, take up your pallet, and walk. Mark 2. So it was a testimony to that spiritual element. But a lot of times he's just out there, he's healing. And he's healing because there are sheep without a shepherd. They have many needs, and he healed everybody that came to him.
Yeah, we think of the kingdom when God dwelled directly with us in the Garden of Eden, and then, of course, when he returns in the new heaven and the new earth. And there is no, brokenness, and, there's no more, there's pain and suffering. And so I think here's Jesus being an ambassador for the kingdom, if you will, right? He's showing us exactly what this looks like back when it, was the reality in the Garden of Eden, and what it's going to be like when he returns. And that's why I think he said, isn't it, the kingdom is here, it's present. I am the ambassador of the kingdom. I'm showing you what it's going to look like. In kind of its fullest sense. Dwight, I would like to bring you in. I don't know, Greg, you may not know this, but Dwight just completed a really terrific book on the kingdom of God on this very subject. Dwight, why don't you explain a little bit about that book and what questions come to your mind in this discussion on the kingdom from your writing?
Yeah, I'll just say in short, Greg, I bear witness with your saying he's calling us back to his authority, his rulership, his kingship, because that's what struck out at me as I read the book. It's like God's calling us back. What's he calling us back to? He's calling us back to his goodness, to what he designed for us, to how he designed us to live. And that's actually the essence of the book.
What is the title of the book, Dwight?
Actually, I call it Made to Live, the Good News of the Kingdom, because when I think of what God created in Genesis 1 and 2, the outcome is life and a really, really amazing way to live. And so Adam and Eve had that, and then, of course, it was lost. And it's not that we're going to go forward to it. He's calling us back to Eden, calling us back. So when Jesus was healing, I see him healing. Well, I'm trying to fix something that was broken,
right,
and go back.
Well
so
put.
Anyway, and this idea of I'm not of this world. I am not of this world system.
We'll send you a copy,
true.
Greg.
So
we'll put it in the
clear.
mail after the conversations over here today.
All right,
so.
thank you.
You can say
I'll
that
take
10
it.
times. I'm not of this world system.
Well, that's helpful, Greg. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
Or Luke, yeah.
the verse, people use it all the time, be an ambassador of Christ. I love it. It's a beautiful verse. Reflect Christ in everything you do, become more Christ-like. But sometimes I struggle a little bit with it, because when it's this calling back to, is it calling us back to Christ? Because Christ, the person, is a little bit hard for me to look at as a blueprint for all of my life. And all of my interactions in the world, what I'm doing, what I'm building. Whereas the idea of the kingdom is a little bit easier for me to wrap my head around. It's more of a blueprint of a way of life, a culture that I'm trying to create, a culture that I'm trying to build, represent, reflect, all of that. And that concept to me just makes a little bit more sense for me to wrap my head around, like, what's my trajectory here? And for that reason, I love it when people say be ambassadors of the kingdom, because that just have an easier time to wrap my head around it, because we're trying to represent something here. And
it was interesting the way Paul put it. I kind of corrected myself midstream there. He said, "We beg of you on behalf of Christ to be reconciled to God," and so that pulling back in to relationship with God. Now, obviously, we have a Trinitarian understanding of God, and Christ is God. But sometimes he's positioned there as the Messiah, as the human Messiah, the God-man who is bringing us back into relationship with the Father. And in that regard, I want to be careful I say this because I don't want to be misunderstood, but Jesus is actually not our model in everything. He is our model as the perfect human being and the perfect model of virtuous humanity. And we are in our sanctification are being made like him. And this is Paul's promise in Romans 8, that he's working all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. So the way God's using all this stuff is to make us like Jesus, all right? But there was a whole lot of stuff that Jesus was involved with that was reflective of his divine nature, and John 5 talks about Jesus. I give life to who I want to give life to, and everybody should honor me as they honor the Father. Well, that's for him. That isn't a guide for us. And he's also the Christ, the Messiah. So when we look at his life, and this is why I resonate with you on this, Luke, where for me the advancing of the kingdom and drawing people back to God is more. I can sink my teeth into that a little bit better than having Jesus maybe in the way I want to do all the things that Jesus did, and Jesus didn't campaign against slavery, so I'm not going to campaign, or whatever. Jesus did what he was supposed to do then, and some of that was very unique to the incarnate Son of God, who is also the Messiah. As the perfect human being that he was, that we are being sanctified into, we have different marching orders that apply to us. And as Jesus, as I mentioned earlier, gave an example of meeting particular needs that were temporal needs of the people there that were not directly related to the message of salvation, but were to meeting human need because he had compassion for them. Those are things that we can do in the context of our culture now, and we ought to be doing as we're able to do that. It's what Dwight and I did, umpteen decades ago. In a prior life almost. It seems like, Dwight, it was so long ago. It was more than half my life ago. But in the capacity that we were able to serve there, we were advancing the kingdom and being Christ-like in the context of those particular
Greg,
needs.
can I just stop you?
And so I find with you that I resonate more with the kingdom notion in that regard. Go ahead.
I just want to use just the language there you just used, I think, is something I struggled with. You said you were talking about your time in the refugee camps with Dwight, and you said we were advancing the kingdom. And I've had people take real exception to that language. We are advancing the kingdom. And I don't, sometimes I need to follow up and find out exactly what the objection is. I think sometimes it's an objection to kind of a human-centered power, like we're doing this, almost apart from God. I think another way that people may object to it is, no, God does this when he comes back, and he's the one who's advancing his kingdom, not you, not us. And so talk of, we're advancing the kingdom becomes a bit problematic. Any thoughts that you have or wisdom on that? Because I do struggle with that, just in terms of clarity with my brothers and sisters in Christ.
Well, I have thoughts about that. By the way, God has arranged to give rewards. Talk about crowns and different language that's used. You only get a reward for something that you deserve. Yeah. You have to do something. Now, people say, well, we're throwing the crowns at his feet in the end. I said, that, yeah, maybe, but that's not my point. God is giving something because of merit. Now, not salvation, clearly. But as we walk with God, we're doing things ourselves that we have a choice to do that is meritorious in God's mind, which is why he rewards those particular actions.
A calling to do, right? So, more than just a choice. Really a calling to do, right? You have an assignment.
Yes, a responsibility, and we're told. Right. So sometimes there's what's going on here, Scott, is some certain theology about sanctification is doing work. So there's an idea, for example, all of God and none of me. All of God and none of me. I think that's not biblical.
Me too. Yeah.
Okay, here's the way I would put it, and it's kind of, I'm trading on the Chalcedonian formula. It's 100% God and 100% me. In other words, God has 100% responsibility for his side of the equation. And here I'm talking not about salvation. I'm talking about the issue of service and the like, and sanctification. God's going to do his job. But there's all kind of marching orders we have in the New Testament. Those are there for a reason, because we're expected to do them. Independence on God based on gifts that he's given us. Peter says, look, you got a gift, use it as a good servant to the glory of God, but get going.
Yes. Right.
Okay, and so and that is, we are 100% responsible for that. So my goal as a Christian worker, servant, ambassador, whatever, is to take whatever gifts that I have at the moment and try to employ them with good effort. And when I do that, I can feel good about the results. This is why Proverbs says, let another one praise you, not your own mouth. So don't praise yourself. But you know what? Other people are going to say nice things about the good things that happen because you were meaningfully involved in the process of producing that. So you can receive the thanks as appropriately, is kind of the way I take that passage. So we have a part.
Yes.
And if somebody's saying, oh, you're not extending the kingdom, I'd say, of course I am. Watch. Now, I'm not doing it on my strength, but I'm a player here. I'm not just an empty
Yeah, or as
vessel.
our friend Vishal von
That I think
Mongolwadi
is
would say, you're
mistaken
not a
for some-
zero. He always says that, you're not a zero. and that's true. Yeah, God created us to be kings as well. I think that's something that we don't often take to heart, that he has expectations for us as kings. Now, vice regents, right? We're not kings at his level by any means,
Right.
but we're still kings, and as kings we have responsibility, to rule rightly under his kingdom. So
I have a question for you, Greg. Actually, a couple, but I'll just ask one right now. That is, what's changed in your thinking in the last 10 years? Or what's not changed, but how have you seen your understanding of God and his purposes for the world and for your ministry evolve? Is that too big?
No, it is big, but it's a really good question. And I think more than anything else, Dwight, I have had a much deeper appreciation for the sovereignty of God, and especially in the hardships of life. I had a conversation with my daughter. I got an 18-year-old, which is I know, I'm an old guy, so that looks really weird. And people tell me, well, how did that happen? I said, I don't remember, but I need prayer.
Abraham.
In any event, I think it was yesterday. We're driving back from the airport. She picked me up. And I was just talking about this. I said that there are a lot of hardships that come into your life, but there's a reason. I told her, as I've gotten older in the Lord, I have had a much more thankful attitude for the difficulties, the hardships, and I can genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, say thank you, Lord, for the durable hardships that I've faced in my own life. And things that, prayer hasn't made a dent in for many, many years. I still pray about it, but still, because I understand that this is what the gift that God has given me to strengthen me and build me up and make me more like Jesus and make me more capable of taking more responsibility for fruitful things in the kingdom. And that is huge, Dwight. And as each year goes on, I feel like I settle into that more comfortably. And I told her too. He says, "Yeah, and this is not going to go away. When you kind of rise to the occasion of one set of challenges, it isn't like everything gets mellow. It's like you get a new set of challenges that God provides that is going to, okay, now it's harder." But you're more equipped. You get inured over time to the exposure. Just like, I think the military metaphors and analogs are appropriate here. You get toughened to the task so you can take on more. And that's probably more than anything else, that has been the biggest, most significant thing in the last 10 years in my life as a follower of Christ.
Thanks for sharing that, Greg. I want to, your time is short, Greg. I want to circle back to something you said at the beginning when we were talking about being ambassadors that I thought was really helpful. And I just want to underscore it for our listeners. I think this is a great takeaway. To be a faithful ambassador for Christ and his kingdom, it requires knowledge. We have to be aware of the message of the kingdom that we represent,
Right.
the story of the kingdom, the story of reality. We need wisdom in terms of the method of communication. And then you said the one that's often neglected is we have to reflect the character of the king, the attractive manner.
Right.
I just think that those three elements, I just think it's really practical, Greg, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
In terms of Darrow, our mentor and coworker, Darrow Miller, who you know as well, he said there's really
Yes.
three.
It's been a long time since I've seen Darrell, but I owe an immense debt of gratitude to him for initiating this whole enterprise with me and Food for the Hungry back many, many years
Well,
ago.
he's also stayed so faithful, and has just been, he's been like a father to me, a mentor and a father, and so faithful to the ministry that he began. But back to the message, he said, you have to understand the message of the kingdom of God. You have to understand that story. It is a story, and you have to understand that really well. You have to understand the story of the people that you're working amongst, right? Because they have a different story, right? They a different storyline. In the beginning is matter, and matter is all that exists, and we are just highly evolved creatures in material beings, or whatever that story is. They have a story as well. And then you have to understand the story of the culture that you come from if you're working cross-culturally, because that's shaped you as well as the story of the Scripture. I always appreciated Darrow saying that. But the wisdom, though, I just want to talk, maybe we could kind of wrap up with this. We live at a time, this is the kind of the method, and you have to understand the culture that you're speaking to. That's really, you said that's really important. And right now we live in the West in a postmodern time when talking about truth just shuts down conversations. How do you, what does wisdom or tactical diplomacy look like for Christians who are trying to speak truthfully in a time when truth is just discounted, not even really believed in?
Yeah, this is what I spend quite a bit of time on in that book, Tactics, and there's a basic game plan, and it's actually quite simple. There are 3 steps to it, but they all involve asking questions. And when you think about it, the very first model question, let me back up. The first step is to just gather information. It's all you're worried about when you get in a conversation with somebody. Even if they're pushing back, you want to get information. And part of the goal there is to have a clear understanding of that point you made, kind of where they're coming from, what is their
story?
outlook, their perspective. And I really encourage people to spend a lot of time doing that. For one, you don't want to misrepresent their view, whatever that happens to be. That's just bad manners, and it's bad thinking. It's a straw man fallacy. But it also shows respect for them. Paul says in Colossians 4, so you know how to respond to each person. And so you have to deal with people who are individuals. And you have to, and how do you find that out? Well, you let them talk. And when you let them talk, that's polite. And you're getting valuable information, and it's safe because you're not putting your ideas on the line. But you are also gathering a tremendous amount of valuable information as you continue to ask questions. And the model question is, that I suggest, is some form of the question, what do you mean by that? And so if a guy says, look, I don't believe in God, I said, what kind of God don't you believe in? I'm kind of curious, because there's lots of, maybe I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in, right? And so I just want him to talk about the views. So those are, it doesn't matter. You mentioned a postmodern culture. I think we have to be careful we don't take that too seriously. And I'll tell you why that is. And I learned this from Francis Schaeffer back in the 70s when I was a fairly new Christian. And Francis Schaeffer said, and this I developed this idea in the tactics book, or the tactic I call Inside Out. And what Schaeffer said is that, hey, the fact is everybody is made in the image of God. And everybody has to live in the world that God made. And so even though they might deny aspects of that as they're promoting their philosophy or whatever point of view, it turns out they can't get away from that. Deep inside, they know better, and on unguarded moments, they are going to talk about this. Yesterday, Saturday, I was in San Jose. We had a conference, a Q&A, and there was an atheist on the team, and the Q&A, and he was saying how he doesn't need God. He doesn't harm anybody. He tries to live a good life. Now, notice something here. The atheist cannot have an objective morality because there's no grounding for it. It's just molecules in the universe, in the beginning were the particles, like you were saying a moment ago, Scott. So there's no basis for that at all. And many carefully thinking atheists had admitted this, but what is he doing? He's trading. I'm already a good person. See, I don't try to hurt people. He is importing a Christian notion, or at least a notion that's consistent with theism,
hijacking
a moral notion, and
that's what
exactly,
Nancy Pearcey
hijacking.
says,
Now, why does he do that? He does that because he's made in the image of God. and he's got morality built in, and he's trying to smuggle that in, hijack it, or whatever. Okay, so this is an example of what I'm talking about. And at the end of that particular chapter, I write, people can run from God, but they can't run from themselves. Okay, and so when I'm addressing anybody anymore, even with the postmodern impulse, it's wildly self-refuting. You know, when the philosophers play this all out, and I don't even know how they can't see this, because that's the suicide tactic. When a point of view commits suicide, I know that I can speak to these individuals or these audiences, and I can speak actual truth to them, and they will understand that I'm speaking truth, because they operate in terms of truth. Postmodern people, well, we don't believe in reason. I certainly don't believe in Christianity. Why not? Here's the reasons.
Right.
A, B, C, D, E,
Right,
you know.
yeah.
Huh? Well, on the one hand, they're talking like postmodernists. On the other hand, they're talking like human beings made in the image of God. Now, if we know that, we don't have to be afraid of all of these trends. We need to be sensitive to them, be aware of them, ask questions about them. There is no truth. Okay, this sounds really simplistic, but my question is, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to take that. I think you want me to take it seriously, right? I think you want me to believe it, right? But the minute I try to believe that what you said was true, you're telling me I can't do that. So now I'm confused. What am I supposed to do with that? Now notice I end with a question. Now the ball's back in their court, okay? And there's nothing they can do with it, because they've just walked themselves into a corner. And because I see that, I can use a question to do that. So my point here with regard to the postmodern, so-called postmodern culture, I think there certainly is a postmodern impulse. Everything's relativistic. I mean, you do you.
Right.
What more profound characterization of personal relativism can you find? And that's kind of the clarion cry of the age. But nevertheless, people are getting tired of this. And there is a change afoot, and you can see it on the higher levels and also among students. And I think what happened with Charlie Kirk on September 10th was just a force multiplier. Their churches are filling up, Bibles are selling like crazy, youth groups are filling up, and everywhere I go, people see it. Something is going on. And I think, in principle, people are realizing how empty the worldly way is. It doesn't satisfy that deep hunger of their heart being made in the image of God.
Oh, so well said. That's a great place to kind of wrap it up. It is such a hopeful note to wrap up on. God is, Aslan is stirring right now. There's no doubt about it. And thanks for those words. Luke or Dwight, final thoughts from you as we wrap up today?
I had one. It was, my other question was, what's your message for the church today?
Well, I got really frustrated just on my own show, people calling in and dealing with people, younger people especially, and I took a little Post-it, I put it in my front Bible, in the front of my Bible, and I wrote this line. I said, faithfulness is not theologically complicated. Okay, you take marriage, you take sex, you take gender, you take abortion, you take Jesus being the only way. You just go right down the line. These are all controversial issues, okay? Front and center in the culture. I get that. But it's not hard. If you're a Christian, why are you faltering on this? Why is there confusion in your mind? And my challenge to the church is just be faithful. That's it. Put your hand to the plow and don't look back. It's not hard. In other words, it's not like there's all these gray areas where we just don't know what the truth is as revealed by God. No, look, it's right there. And it's repeated many times. And, I mean, some people think, well, the abortion issue is not clear. Just go to Luke chapter 1. And there's Mary and Elizabeth, and just look at their conversation. Obviously, John the Baptist in the second trimester, and Jesus is a zygote. And John the Baptist is leaping with joy in the presence of Jesus, the Lord, the mother of my Lord. I mean, so it's all there. Just put your hand to the plow and keep moving forward, and don't be concerned about the mob. And here I got a verse for him. It's Mark 15:15. And Mark 15:15, this is Jesus with Pilate, and Pilate's trying to get him off. He can release somebody. He tells the crowd, who do you want, Jesus or Barabbas? They say, Barabbas. Well, what do you do with Jesus? Crucify him. Okay, next line, verse 15. Wishing to please the crowd. Note that. Wishing to please the crowd. He released Barabbas, had Jesus scourged and crucified. And I tell audiences, especially young people, I says, man, you so many young people are siding with Barabbas. They're acting like Pilate, and they're turning back on their Savior. Don't let it be you. Just make a decision right now. You're not going to please the mob. You want to end your life hearing the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant."
Amen.
Shoot for
Amen.
that goal. That would be my message.
The audience
to the
of
church.
one. Please,
Go
that
on.
audience of one. That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
That's great. Well, Greg, thanks so much for your time today and just these incredible words. I know I'll be reflecting on them the rest of the day and beyond, and just for your ministry, the books that you've written, the radio and the podcast, and all that you've done in the area of apologetics. We're so grateful for you, Greg, and grateful for this time.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad for what you guys are doing too. And Dwight, what a treat to see you again after all these
Same
years.
here.
In the saddle, wearing the yoke, your hand at the plow. That's great.